put my heart in beside 'em and send them to the one I love. She'll be glad to receive 'em, and I know she'll believe 'em. It's something we've been talking of. There may be orange blossoms later, kind of think that there will, 'cause she does something to me and my heart won't stand still. Give me 1 dozen roses, put my heart in beside 'em, and send them to the one I love. Well, there's nothing in that song that connects to what I'm making today, but I am making them for the one I love, so I thought I'd sing that song. The only song I could think that had one of the ingredients in was Tommy Rowe's old hit, Cinnamon. But somehow the lyrics to that song didn't quite fit with what I was making today either. So I decided to sing that old lovely tune, Give Me 1 Dozen Roses. So today we are making one thing, but the first part of this could make something else. Actually, does make something else. So if you watch way back at the beginning of my videos, I did a video on making baking powder biscuits. It was a terrible video. The camera quit halfway through. So if you really wanted my baking powder biscuit recipe, you probably didn't get it from that particular video, but you can get it today, because the first step in what we're making today is making dough for baking powder biscuits. So the first thing you're going to need is 1 3/4 cups of white all-purpose flour. Now, an optional ingredient here, if you want to add it, is a tablespoon of white granulated sugar. But because I'm making these for my sweetheart, who you all know is a diabetic, I'm omitting that, and the biscuits taste just fine without it. And what I'm going to be making with this biscuit dough will be quite sweet anyway. So we will omit the tablespoon of sugar. However, if you wish to add it, you may do so. The next thing we're going to add is a tablespoon of baking powder. I always emphasize that because there's nothing worse than getting your baking powder and your baking soda mixed up. If you want pucker power, you need Levoris. How many of you remember that ad? Levoris, join the chorus for Levoris pucker powder. And Levoris, for those of you that don't know, was a mouthwash, or maybe still is a mouthwash, I'm not sure. And the next thing you're going to want to add to this for your dry ingredients is a 1/2 teaspoon, that's 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'll put that in there. Grab my trusty whisk, and we're going to whisk our dry ingredients together. So that's your ingredients. 1 3/4 cups of flour. Now, sometimes I will make these, I will use 1 cup of white flour and 3/4 cup of multigrain flour or whole wheat flour. But for what I'm making today, I'm going to use 1 3/4 cups of white all-purpose flour. So I just want to get those ingredients all nicely whisked together. So 1 3/4 cups of flour, optional tablespoon of white sugar, a tablespoon of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So that's your dry ingredients. Next, you're going to want 1/3 cup of butter or margarine. Either one will work, but butter, as most people know, tastes much nicer than margarine. For those of you out there that work in the margarine industry, no offense. Margarine is a great product. I just happen to prefer butter myself. It's just a personal preference. So there we go. And you're all going, I wish you'd quit being so picky about getting everything. Well, you're right, I should be, but that's just me. What can I say? Now we're going to use a pastry cutter and cut that margarine or butter into our dry ingredients. And you're going to do this until you have fine crumbs. Now, those of you that make baking powder biscuits,
You can probably just use your own baking powder biscuit recipe if you don't like mine, or if you want to give mine a try, by all means do. I don't think there's too many variations in baking powder biscuit recipes. Maybe an extra secret ingredient or something, but most of them are basically flour, baking powder, and salt. And then, like I say, in this case, you can add that optional tablespoon of sugar if you so desire. Like I say, you want to blend this in until it's down to little fine crumbs. And once you've got to that, it doesn't take long to do. Just get the excess off the pastry cutter here. And of course, you all did what before we started? I know you know this one. You all washed your hands, right? Of course you did. I did too. Now, to our now mushed together dry ingredients, or cut together, we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of milk. Now you can use anything, I would not use skim milk, but you can use anything from 1%, which is what I'm using, to cream if you really want to make rich biscuits. I actually have done that a few times, used whole cream, because that's what I happened to have on hand when I made them. It makes for very, very tasty biscuits, but they're also very high-calorie biscuits. So, now one thing I always find with this is I usually end up having to add a little more flour, so I keep my dredge handy and I just sprinkle in a little extra flour. Not quite sure why that happens. Sometimes it'll work out just perfect using the same number of ingredients. And sometimes it's just a little too sticky and I have to add a little more. I have to add a little more flour to get it to just the right. You want it to ball together, stick together. But we need just a little bit more. You don't want it to get too dry because then it won't stick together, and if it won't stick together, you have a problem. There we go. We're going to end up adding a little more flour too as we need it. So now I've got that where I want it. I'm going to lightly flour my counter. And turn the dough out of the bowl onto the counter. There we go. Get that extra little bit out of there. All right. Now we're going to knead this. Well, and you can use the whichever spelling of knead you want. For our recipe, we are going to knead it, N-E-E-D, but to make it good for the recipe, we need to K-N-E-A-D it first. So we'll just really give it a good kneading here. That's about as good as it needs to be, and we're not trying to beat it down like you would yeast bread or something. Now what we want to do is we want to spread it out and kind of make it into a rectangle if we can. Now for biscuits at this point, you could take your biscuit cutter, punch this out to about 1/4 inch thick, take your biscuit cutter and cut out your biscuits and put them on your cookie sheet. But for what we're going to do today, I try to make this as close to a square as I can, or a rectangle as I can. You're wondering why, I know, but you'll see in a minute. And I can actually go a little thinner than 1/4 inch for what we're doing today. Now, what are we doing today? Well, I'm making what I refer to as cheater cinnamon rolls. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take powdered cinnamon and we are going to sprinkle it, across our biscuit dough. Now, how much cinnamon you use is totally up to you. If you like a lot of cinnamon, use a lot. If you don't like a lot of cinnamon in your cinnamon rolls, then use less. There we go. And I forgot one ingredient. I'll have to get that out of the fridge here. Now you can use raisins or walnuts. I'm using, guess what? Bet you all know, pecans, because I'm a pecan freak, right? You all know how I love my pecans. Now traditionally in cinnamon rolls you would have raisins, but because I'm making these diabetic friendly, raisins are little sugar pills. And so not always the best thing to use. I just want to pat those in a little bit. You don't want to use a huge amount, just kind of enough to know that they're there. Now, this is where the sweet comes in. I am using brown sugar Splenda. Now, if you're not diabetic and not worried about the sugar thing, you can just use regular old brown sugar. And we want to get a fair bit of that on there. First time I made these, my dear wife said to me, "You didn't put enough of the gooey stuff in there." I said, "What do you mean?" There's not enough goo. Cinnamon rolls have to have lots of goo in them. So by that I realized I needed to put more of the brown sugar in because that's what makes them gooey on the inside. Now I'm not going to take this all the way to the edge. I'm going to leave the edge here a little blank. But as you can see, even for a diabetic, these are probably a little sweet. There we go. All right, now the next thing we're going to do, I don't know if hopefully you can see that. I'm going to roll this because that's how cinnamon rolls are made. If you don't roll it, you don't have a cinnamon roll. You just have a cinnamon. Maybe, I don't know. What would you call it if you didn't roll it? A cinnamon pizza? Pancake? All right, now as you can see, I have my cinnamon roll. Now I'm going to just gather our excess ingredients over here off to the side and get rid of them. Then you're going to want a cookie sheet. Now for baking powder biscuits, you do not need to grease your cookie sheet. You can just use it as it is. But because of the sticky ingredients in the middle of these, you need to you can either use parchment paper, you can grease the pan with a little bit of sugar. I can't even talk straight. A little bit of butter or margarine, or I'm using a silicone sheet inside my pan. Now, here's a trick. Take yourself some dental floss, but instead of flossing your teeth with it, you just slide it under the end of your roll, cross it over itself, and pull. Trink. And you have your first cinnamon roll ready to go on the tray. Now you're going to lose a little bit of ingredients on the counter, and that's okay because we'll just put them on top afterwards. You can see how easy this is to do. If you try cutting it with a knife, what will happen is you'll squish it down and they won't be round anymore. They'll be smooshed. You'll be having cinnamon smooshes. But using the dental floss like this to cut your cinnamon rolls, it just cuts right through because it's putting equal pressure all the way around. Just that easy. Now, what I didn't tell you was, before you start this process of making these, you want to preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now one nice thing about these, they're quick to make, and they only take 10 minutes to bake. How's that? That rhymes. They're quick to make and take 10 minutes to bake. So you can make them just before your kids get home from school, and they can have a nice hot cinnamon roll when they get home. These aren't big, they're not giant cinnamon rolls like you would get at a bakery. And they're not going to taste exactly the same as cinnamon rolls you get at a bakery because regular cinnamon rolls use a yeast dough. Not what I'm using, it's just a non-yeast dough. Like I say, the floss just makes it so much easier to cut these. Let's see what we're going to get here. Well, we're getting a little more than a dozen here, so I'll have to kind of scoot these around to get them all on the tray. So one nice thing with them, they're not going to expand the way a yeast cinnamon roll would. Now, see, we have all this ingredient that fell out, and what we can do is we can sprinkle that on the top here. Just add that to top. The heat in the oven will help it to melt. All right, let's have a quick look here. I'll just move the camera, so hang on to yourself so you don't get motion sickness. Whoop, but easy. But there you go. You can see our cinnamon rolls waiting to go in the oven. Still with me, or did I lose you somewhere? Did you fall off on me? All right, let's move you back there. I think that's where we were. Well, there we go. The oven's ready, 450 degrees. And we'll take our cinnamon rolls and slide in. And we're going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Remember to start the timer. I forgot to hit the start button to preheat the oven, but I have remembered to hit the timer so we know when 10 minutes is up. So that was a sort of brief interlude to get our cinnamon rolls into the oven, and we'll be back in 10 minutes to have a look at how they look once they're baked. And there we go. We are done. So we need our pot holders because things in the oven get hot. And there we have our lovely cinnamon rolls. So let's move them onto a cooling rack. Now you'll notice I put some paper towel under my cooling rack, so if any of the goo, as my wife calls it, should happen to drip through the rack, it will end up on the paper towel rather than sticking to my countertop. Now, we don't do this because, again, I'm making these diabetic friendly, but if you wanted to make up an icing sugar drizzle to put over the top of these, some people like icing on their cinnamon rolls, you can definitely do that. But this is a quick and easy way to make cinnamon rolls without having to make the yeast dough and let it rise and beat it down. Oh, I can't wait to get that. Close up our oven. Kaboom. But there we go. Hope you've enjoyed this recipe, and I'll give it a try. If you decide to make the baking powder biscuits and not proceed on to make the cinnamon rolls, the oven temperature is the same, 450 degrees, and the cooking time is the same, 10 minutes. Now you can kind of go, you might take a look at these after 10 minutes and they may not, in your oven may need a little bit more time, but you know your oven better than I do. So I would say probably 12 minutes would be the max. You'd probably start having some burning on the bottom if you go past 12 minutes. And definitely be less than 10, I don't think your biscuits would be cooked at all. So 450 degrees for 10 minutes is what I recommend. But give it a try in your oven, see how it turns out. Alrighty, I'm going to take a photograph of these from an aerial view so you can have a better look at them. But today we made what I call cheater cinnamon buns, made with baking powder biscuit dough, cinnamon, brown sugar Splenda, and pecans. Now, like I say, you can use just brown sugar, and if you don't like nuts in your cinnamon rolls, you can by all means use raisins. Make them the way you want them so that you will enjoy them. Alrighty, until Friday when we have our shout-outs, story, and grower of the week, take care, stay safe, and God bless.